In the vast expanse of the Galactic Coalition, where alien species measured strength by the size of their fleets and the ferocity of their warriors, humans were considered the weakest link. Among humans, Captain Elena Vasquez was seen as the weakest of all, too small, too young, too emotional for the brutal realities of interstellar warfare. But what the galaxy didn't understand was that humans had something no other species possessed: the ability to turn their greatest weaknesses into their most devastating strengths. And Elena was about to teach them all a lesson they would never forget. When the most feared alien commander in the galaxy personally requests that the little human girl be put in charge of the most dangerous mission in Coalition history, everyone assumes it's either a death sentence or a cruel joke. They couldn't be more wrong. Sometimes the smallest fighter carries the biggest bite. Sometimes the one everyone underestimates is exactly who you need when the impossible needs to be done. This is the story of how a mocked human captain became the most feared tactical genius in the galaxy, and how her enemies learned too late that challenging humanity's spirit was the deadliest mistake they could ever make. Captain Elena Vasquez stood barely 5 feet tall in her standard Coalition uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that made her look even younger than her 28 years. Around her, the massive command deck of the Coalition flagship hummed with activity as officers from a dozen different species coordinated the largest military operation in galactic history. None of them paid her any attention. She was used to being invisible. "The humans sent their child again," rumbled General Tax, his reptilian features twisted in what passed for amusement among his people. The Vorthak commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, his scales glinting under the bridge lights as he reviewed tactical displays with his staff. "Do they think this is a daycare center?" Elena kept her expression neutral as she approached the central planning table. She had learned long ago that reacting to such comments only made things worse. The fact that she was the youngest captain in Coalition history and the first human to command a cruiser-class vessel seemed to count for nothing among her alien colleagues. "Captain Vasquez reporting for briefing, General," she said, her voice steady despite the snickers from the Vorthak officers. Tax barely glanced at her. Ah, yes, the human representative. How? Quaint. I suppose Command wants someone to take notes. Around the table, other species were represented by their finest military minds. The insectoid Chitauri had sent Hive Commander Zek, whose compound eyes reflected tactical data with mechanical precision. The crystalline Resonari were represented by Harmonic General Kirith, whose body chimed softly with each thought process. Even the gaseous nebuloids had manifested Avatar Prime Whisper and Void for this gathering. And then there was Elena, looking like a child who had wandered into a convention of monsters. "The situation is grave," Tax began, his claws clicking against the holographic display controls. The central projector came alive, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Outer Rim territories. Red indicators pulsed ominously throughout the region. "The Devourers have established 17 forward bases in the neutral zone. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a massive offensive against our core worlds." Elena studied the display with practiced eyes. The Devourers were the Coalition's greatest threat. A machine race that consumed entire planets, converting all organic and inorganic matter into more of themselves. They had appeared from dark space 5 years ago, and every engagement with them had ended in Coalition defeat or Pyrrhic victory at best. "Standard protocol would be to establish a defensive perimeter around our core systems," continued Hive Commander Zek, his mandibles clicking rapidly as he processed combat algorithms. "However, intelligence indicates the Devourers have developed new assimilation technology. A defensive stance may prove insufficient." Harmonic General Kyrith's crystalline form chimed in agreement. "The harmonic resonance of their advance suggests overwhelming force. Our preliminary calculations indicate a 73% probability of core system penetration within 6 standard cycles." Elena frowned as she studied the tactical readout. Something didn't look right about the Devourer positioning. While the others debated defensive strategies, she began running mental calculations, thinking about the enemy's past behavior patterns and resource requirements. "What about a preemptive strike?" she asked quietly. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to her, and Elena felt the familiar weight of condescending stares. "I beg your pardon?" General Tax's voice dripped with barely concealed irritation. "A preemptive strike," Elena repeated, stepping closer to the display. "Instead of waiting for them to attack our core systems, we could target their forward bases while they're still establishing supply lines." Tax's laugh was a harsh, guttural sound. "Child, do you have any idea how many ships we would need for such an operation? The Devourers have positioned their bases across 17 different systems. We would need to divide our forces, giving them the advantage in every engagement. Not if we didn't attack all of them," Elena said, her mind racing as the strategy formed. "Look at their positioning. These aren't random placements. They're following a specific pattern based on resource availability and strategic value." She reached toward the display controls, then hesitated. Taking control of the tactical projector without permission would be seen as incredibly presumptuous. But the pattern was so clear to her now. "May I?" she asked. Tax waved a dismissive claw. "By all means, enlighten us with human wisdom." Elena manipulated the display, highlighting specific bases and drawing connection lines between them. "These 7 bases here form a supply triangle. They're supporting each other with resources and manufacturing capabilities. If we could eliminate just 3 key positions, here, here, and here, the entire network would collapse." The assembled officers studied her projection with varying degrees of skepticism. Elena could see them analyzing her logic, looking for flaws. "Even if your assessment is correct," Avatar Prime Whisper in Void spoke, "its gaseous form rippling with electromagnetic patterns, the human fleet lacks the firepower for such precision strikes. Your vessels are modest in capability." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. It was true that human ships were smaller and less heavily armed than those of other coalition species. Earth's industrial capacity was still recovering from the global conflicts that had preceded First Contact, and humanity had been the last species to join the coalition. "That's exactly why it could work," she said. "They won't expect humans to lead such an operation. They'll assume we're playing a support role while the main forces hit other targets." "Assuming?" Tax's eyes narrowed. Military strategy should not be based on assumptions about enemy psychology, particularly when that psychology belongs to machines. "But they're not just machines," Elena insisted. "Yes, they're artificial intelligences, but they're also adaptive. They learn from our tactics. Every major engagement, they've studied our traditional coalition strategies: overwhelming force, technological superiority, direct confrontation. They've adapted to counter those approaches." She manipulated the display again, bringing up historical battle data. "Look at the engagement at Proxima Tertius." The Vorthak led with their standard hammer and anvil formation. The Devourers had countermeasures ready. At Kepler Station, the Chitauri used their swarm tactics. Again, the enemy was prepared. "What's your point, human?" Tax's patience was clearly wearing thin. "My point is that they've never faced a human-led operation. We've always been auxiliaries, support vessels, evacuation coordinators. They don't have tactical profiles for human command strategies because we've never been allowed to develop them." I've Commander Zeke's compound eyes focused on Elena with sudden interest. "Your species' combat doctrine remains largely theoretical. Intriguing." Elena nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And our ships, while smaller, are also more maneuverable. Human pilots have faster reaction times than most coalition species. We might not be able to go toe-to-toe with Devourer capital ships, but we could hit multiple targets simultaneously before they could mount a coordinated response." Harmonic General Kyrith chimed softly, processing the concept. "The mathematical possibility exists. However, the risk factor remains significant. Human casualties would likely be substantial. I'm aware of that, Elena said quietly, but if we don't act soon, casualty projections for a defensive engagement are far worse. The room fell silent as the assembled commanders considered her proposal. Elena could practically see them weighing the potential benefits against the risks, and more importantly, against their own prejudices about human capabilities. Finally, General Takes spoke. Your proposal has theoretical merit. However, Command would never approve such a mission under human leadership. The political implications alone. What if they didn't have a choice? The new voice cut through the discussion like a blade. Every being on the command deck turned toward the source, and Elena felt her blood freeze in her veins. Standing in the entrance to the briefing area was Supreme War Commander Kazeth, the most feared military leader in Coalition space. The massive Vorthak officer commanded respect from every species in the galaxy, and his tactical genius was legendary. He was also known for his complete ruthlessness and his particular disdain for what he called inferior species. Elena had never seen him in person before, and his presence was overwhelming. Nearly 9 feet tall and built like a living weapon, Kazeth's scales were darker than those of other Vorthaks, almost black in the artificial light. Scars from countless battles crisscrossed his hide, and his eyes burned with an intelligence that missed nothing. War Commander! General Thax straightened to attention, as did every other officer in the area. Elena followed suit, her heart hammering against her ribs. Kazeth's gaze swept the assembled group before settling on Elena. She felt like a small animal being studied by a predator. I have been monitoring this discussion, Kazeth said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. The human's tactical assessment is not without merit. Elena blinked in surprise. Was the Supreme War Commander actually agreeing with her? However, Kazeth continued, moving closer to the holographic display, the proposal lacks the subtlety required for success against an adaptive enemy. He manipulated the controls with practiced ease, bringing up additional data overlays. Devourers are indeed learning from our standard tactics, but they are also learning from our command structures, our decision-making processes, our species-specific behavioral patterns. Elena watched as he highlighted different sections of Devourer territory. They have identified the tactical signatures of every major coalition commander. They know how Tax thinks, how Zek processes battlefield information, how Kirith calculates probability matrices. The Supreme War Commander's burning gaze fixed on Elena again. But they know nothing about how humans wage war, because humans have never been given the chance to show them. The implications of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. He wasn't just acknowledging her tactical assessment, he was considering putting her in charge of the operation. Supreme War Commander, General Thax interjected carefully, surely you're not suggesting that a human should lead a major offensive operation. The political ramifications. Politics, Kazeth cut him off with a dismissive gesture, are irrelevant when facing extinction. The Devourers will not be impressed by our political sensitivities when they are converting our worlds into raw materials. He turned back to Elena, and she forced herself not to step backward under the intensity of his stare. Tell me, human, how would you modify your strategy if given complete tactical authority? Elena's mind raced. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or an elaborate setup for her destruction. Either way, she had to give her best answer. I would use our prejudices against them, she said slowly, thinking through each word carefully. Everyone expects humans to fail. Everyone assumes we're too weak, too inexperienced, too emotional to handle a major operation. She gestured toward the tactical display. So we make that our weapon. We position our forces exactly where everyone would expect them to fail. We make decisions that look like human inexperience but are actually calculated risks. And when the Devourers adapt their tactics to counter what they expect from us, we do the opposite. Ikaza studied her for a long moment. Elaborate. Elena took a deep breath. Traditional coalition doctrine emphasizes overwhelming force and technological superiority, so the Devourers have developed counters for those approaches. But human military history is full of smaller forces defeating larger ones through speed, deception, and unconventional tactics. She manipulated the display, showing a modified version of her original strike plan. Instead of hitting 3 bases simultaneously, we make it look like we're attempting to hit all 17. We position our main forces as obvious decoys, while smaller human squadrons make the real strikes. When the Devourers move to counter our main force, they leave their key positions vulnerable. And when they realize the deception, Hive Commander Zek asked, by then it's too late. Human vessels can't match coalition capital ships for firepower, but we're faster and more maneuverable. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we're gone before they can respond effectively. Elena paused, then looked directly at Kazoth. But the key is that it has to be a human-led operation from start to finish. If other species are making the tactical decisions, the Devourers will recognize familiar patterns and adapt accordingly. Supreme War Commander Kazoth was silent for nearly a full minute, his predator's eyes never leaving Elena's face. Around the command deck, other officers waited with barely concealed tension. Finally, he spoke. Captain Vasquez. Yes, Supreme War Commander, you will have your chance to prove human tactical doctrine. I am placing you in command of Operation Nightfall, effective immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could sense the shock radiating from every other officer on the deck. Supreme War Commander, General Fax's voice was carefully controlled. With all due respect, perhaps we should consider the decision is made because of cut him off with finality. Captain Vasquez will lead a mixed force of human vessels and volunteer units from other coalition species. She will have complete tactical authority for the duration of the operation. Elena felt the weight of a dozen stares, most of them hostile or disbelieving. She had just been handed the kind of command that veteran officers spent decades working toward, and she was terrified that she would prove all their doubts correct. But she was also excited. For the first time in her career, she would have the chance to show what human tactical thinking could accomplish when given free rein. Thank you, Supreme War Commander, she managed to say. I won't disappoint you. Kazoth's expression was unreadable. See that you don't, human. The fate of 17 worlds rests on your untested theories. Failure will mean their complete annihilation. As if that wasn't enough pressure, he leaned closer and spoke in a voice that only she could hear. And failure will also mean that humans never again receive the opportunity to prove their worth in coalition military affairs. Elena met his burning gaze steadily. I understand, Supreme War Commander. Good. You have 48 hours to assemble your force and depart for the Outer Rim. Mission parameters will be transmitted to your vessel within the hour. With that, Keza turned and strode away, leaving Elena standing among officers who now looked at her with expressions ranging from pity to outright hostility. As the briefing broke up and the various commanders dispersed to their duties, Elena remained at the tactical display, staring at the red indicators that marked Devourer positions. In less than 2 days, she would be leading the most important military operation of her life, with the future of humanity's place in the coalition hanging in the balance. She had asked for a chance to prove human tactical capabilities. Now she had it. She just hoped she could live up to her own confidence. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the mission files in her quarters aboard the coalition flagship. The full scope of Operation Nightfall was even more daunting than she had anticipated. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture of Devourer capabilities, and the tactical projections made it clear that conventional approaches had a minimal chance of success. A soft chime indicated someone requesting entry. Elena looked up from her datapad to see Commander Sarah Chen, her closest friend in the coalition fleet, standing in the doorway. Mind if I come in? Sarah asked. I heard about your promotion to Galactic Savior? Elena managed a weak smile as she gestured for Sarah to enter. Commander Chen was everything Elena wasn't. Tall, confident, and possessed of the kind of natural authority that made other officers listen when she spoke. They had graduated from the academy together, but Sarah's career had followed a more traditional path, through destroyer and cruiser commands. "I'm not sure if congratulations or condolences are more appropriate," Elena said, setting down her data pad. Sarah settled into the small chair across from Elena's desk. "How are you holding up?" "I can't imagine the pressure you're under right now." "Terrified doesn't begin to cover it," Elena admitted. "Do you know what the casualty projections are for this operation?" "Even with the most optimistic scenarios, we're looking at losing 30% of our force." "Those are projections based on traditional tactics," Sarah pointed out. "You're not planning to use traditional tactics, are you?" Elena pulled up a holographic display of her preliminary battle plans. "I've been working on modifications to my original strategy. The problem is that I'm essentially designing doctrine from scratch. Every other coalition species has centuries of established military tradition to draw from. Humans have been in space for less than 50 years. Sarah studied the tactical display with professional interest. "What about pre-space military history? Humans were pretty good at warfare before we learned to fly between the stars." "That's what I keep coming back to," Elena said, manipulating the display to show historical Earth battle formations. "There are patterns in human military thinking that other species don't share. We've always been willing to sacrifice material advantages for strategic positioning. We accept higher risks for potentially greater rewards. Give me an example." Elena pulled up data from several famous Earth battles. Take the Battle of Thermopylae, or David and Goliath, if you want to go mythological. The idea of a smaller, supposedly inferior force defeating a much larger enemy through superior tactics and determination. That's a recurring theme in human military history. But those are historical examples, Sarah pointed out. How does that translate to space warfare against machine intelligences? "The Devourers are machines, but they're learning machines," Elena explained. "They adapt based on observed patterns. Every coalition species follows predictable tactical doctrines based on their physical and cultural characteristics. The Vorthax favor direct assault because they're physically powerful. The Chitauri use swarm tactics because they think collectively. The Resonari employ mathematical precision because that's how their minds work." Elena brought up tactical analyses of recent engagements, but look at what happens when the Devourers encounter these patterns. They develop countermeasures within minutes of initial contact. By the time our forces realize they need to adapt, it's too late. Daddy yelled. "So you're betting that they won't have countermeasures for human tactics because they've never seen them in action?" "Exactly. But it's more than that." Elena's eyes brightened as she warmed to her topic. "Human tactical thinking is inherently chaotic compared to other coalition species. We make decisions based on intuition as much as calculation. We're willing to change plans midstream if we see a better opportunity. Other species find that approach unsettling." Sarah laughed. "I remember Professor Yix at the Academy calling human strategic thinking dangerously unpredictable. He meant it as criticism, but maybe it's actually an advantage." A communication alert interrupted their conversation. Elena accepted the incoming transmission to find the face of Captain Marcus Rodriguez, commander of the human cruiser Wellington, appearing on her wall display. "Elena, I just heard about your new assignment. My crew's volunteering for Operation Nightfall if you'll have us." Elena felt a surge of gratitude mixed with concern. Marcus was a good friend and an excellent officer, but bringing more human vessels into the operation would increase political scrutiny and potential casualties. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," Marcus interrupted. "I'm volunteering, and I'm not the only one. Captain Singh from the Mumbai sends her regards and wants to know where to report for duty. Captain Peterson has already filed a transfer request for the new Tokyo." Elena stared at him in amazement. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Every human vessel in the fleet," Marcus said simply. "Word gets around fast when one of our own is given a real command. We're not about to let you face the Devourers with just alien support." Sarah whistled softly. "That's 17 ships, Elena. A full battle group." 18, Marcus corrected. The Earthrise just completed her shakedown cruise and is ready for deployment. Elena felt overwhelmed by the show of support, but also worried about the implications. Marcus, if this operation fails, it won't just end my career. It could set back human integration into coalition military command for decades. And if it succeeds, Marcus replied, it proves that humanity belongs at the strategic level of galactic defense. Either way, we're better off facing this together than letting you carry the burden alone. After ending the communication with Marcus, Elena turned back to Sarah. What do you think? Am I making a mistake by accepting their support? I think you'd be making a bigger mistake by refusing it, Sarah said. You're right that human tactical thinking is different from other coalition species, but that difference is going to be most effective if it's supported by officers who understand your reasoning. Elena nodded slowly. And alien commanders might question orders that seem irrational by their standards. Exactly. You need crews who trust you enough to follow unconventional orders without hesitation. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Elena found herself working with a staff that grew by the hour as officers from various coalition species volunteered for what many were calling a suicide mission. To her surprise, several non-human commanders specifically requested assignment to Operation Nightfall. Commander Vex of the Chitauri cruiser Swarm Striker was the first to volunteer. Your tactical proposals at the briefing were intriguing, he explained when Elena asked why he wanted to join the operation. The hive mind has calculated that conventional approaches have insufficient probability of success. Alternative methodologies merit investigation. The crystalline being known as Resonance Captain Thrill from the Resonari vessel Harmonic Convergence was more direct. Your species exhibits tactical flexibility that our mathematical models cannot adequately predict. This represents an unknown variable that may prove decisive against adaptive enemies. Even more surprising was the addition of Avatar Commander Drift Between Stars from the gaseous nebuloid ship Whisper of Void. When Elena asked for their reasoning, the response came in the form of complex electromagnetic patterns that her universal translator rendered as, "Your thoughts create interesting disturbances in local space-time. Such chaos may confuse machine consciousness." But the most unexpected volunteer was Lieutenant Colonel Zix, a young Vorthak officer from an elite reconnaissance unit. His presence was particularly significant because the Vorthaks as a species had been most vocal in their opposition to human military advancement. "Lieutenant Colonel," Elena said when Zix reported to her planning session, "I have to ask why you volunteered for this mission. Your superiors have made their opinions about human tactical capabilities quite clear." Zix's reptilian features arranged themselves in what Elena had learned was the Vorthak equivalent of a grin. "Perhaps that is precisely why your mission interests me, Captain. My species values strength above all else, but we have begun to confuse size and tradition with true strength. Your proposal suggests that victory comes from adaptation, not just force." He gestured toward the tactical displays surrounding them. "The Devourers defeat us because they adapt faster than we do. They learn our patterns and counter them before we can modify our approach. But humans change their minds constantly. Your entire species suffers from what we would consider tactical instability." Elena wasn't sure whether to be offended or amused. "And you think that's a good thing? Against an adaptive enemy?" "Yes. The Devourers expect rational, predictable tactical evolution. They do not expect commanders who might suddenly decide to charge when logic dictates retreat, or who might withdraw when victory seems certain." As her task force assembled, Elena realized that she was creating something unprecedented in coalition military history, not just because it was human-led, but because it brought together officers from every major species who were specifically interested in unconventional warfare. The final briefing before departure took place aboard Elena's flagship, the recently completed human cruiser Defiance. The ship was smaller than most coalition vessels, but it incorporated design philosophies that reflected human engineering priorities: speed, maneuverability, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods. Elena stood before the assembled commanders in her briefing room, feeling the weight of their expectations. Among them were some of the most experienced officers in coalition space, and they were all waiting to see if a young human could justify their confidence. "Ladies, gentlemen, and respected entities," she began, using the formal coalition address, "we are about to attempt something that has never been tried in the history of interstellar warfare. We're going to defeat a superior enemy force by being unpredictably human." She activated the main holographic display, showing the current tactical situation. Intelligence reports indicate that Devourer forces have completed their initial deployment phase and are beginning advanced fortification of their forward bases. Conventional wisdom says this makes them stronger and harder to dislodge. Elena manipulated the display to highlight specific installations. Human wisdom says this makes them committed to fixed positions and vulnerable to rapid, unexpected attacks. Commander Vex's compound eyes focused intently on the display. Clarification requested. Human doctrine advocates attacking fortified positions. This seems tactically unsound. Elena smiled. Human doctrine advocates attacking where the enemy doesn't expect you to attack. The Devourers are fortifying these positions because they expect us to either avoid them or attack them with overwhelming force. They're not prepared for precision strikes designed to cause maximum disruption with minimum engagement. She highlighted a series of targets throughout the Devourer network. We're not trying to destroy their entire force. We're trying to break their coordination and force them into reactive mode. Once they're responding to our initiatives, instead of executing their own plans, we control the tempo of the engagement. Resonance Captain Thrill chimed softly, indicating deep calculation. The mathematical probability of success depends heavily on the speed of execution and the accuracy of your assumptions about enemy psychology, which is why we're going to test those assumptions on a smaller scale first, Elena said, bringing up detailed plans for their initial strike. Our first target is the Devourer installation in the Proxima Epsilon system. It's relatively isolated, recently established, and serves as a forward observation post for their main force. She outlined the attack plan in detail. The Defiance will make a direct approach, appearing to be a standard reconnaissance mission that went wrong and stumbled into contact. When the Devourers move to intercept, the rest of our force will emerge from hyperspace and hit their installation while their mobile units are pursuing what they think is a fleeing human ship. Lieutenant Colonel Zick studied the plan carefully. This requires precise timing and relies on enemy forces reacting exactly as you predict. What if they do not pursue your vessel? Elena's expression grew serious. Then we learned something important about how they've adapted their tactics, and we modify our approach accordingly. The beauty of small-scale operations is that failure provides intelligence for future success. Avatar Commander Drift Between Stars manifested complex patterns indicating approval. Acceptable risk parameters. Educational value of potential failure justifies initial investment. As the briefing continued, Elena found herself feeling more confident about her chances. The diverse perspectives of her command staff were helping her identify potential weaknesses in her plans and develop contingencies she wouldn't have considered on her own. But the real test would come when they faced the Devourers in actual combat. All the planning in the galaxy meant nothing if her theories about human tactical flexibility proved wrong. Final question, Elena said as the briefing drew to a close. Is everyone absolutely certain they want to be part of this operation? Once we depart, there's no turning back. We're committed to seeing this through to whatever conclusion awaits us. The response was unanimous and immediate. Every commander in the room indicated their readiness to proceed. As her officers departed to prepare their vessels for departure, Elena remained in the briefing room, staring at the tactical displays. In just a few hours, she would be leading the largest human-commanded force in Coalition history into battle against the galaxy's most dangerous enemy. Sarah approached her as the room emptied. Having second thoughts? Elena shook her head. Third thoughts, fourth thoughts, and probably fifth thoughts by now. But no doubts. This is the right approach, and this is the right time to try it. What if you're wrong? Elena turned to face her friend. Then a lot of good people are going to die because I was too arrogant to recognize my own limitations. But if I'm right, we're about to change everything about how the Coalition approaches interstellar warfare. She gestured toward the display showing Devourer positions. They've beaten us at our own game by becoming better at it than we are. So we need to change the game entirely. And you think being unpredictably human is enough to do that? Elena considered the question seriously. I think that humans have spent our entire history finding ways to defeat enemies who were stronger, faster, or more numerous than we were. We've never been the biggest predator in any environment we've entered, but we've always found a way to survive and eventually thrive. She smiled, feeling some of her tension ease. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We fail spectacularly and prove that humans aren't ready for major military command. The galaxy already believes that anyway, so you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Exactly. And that, my friend, is a very human position to be in. The hyperspace jump to the Proxima Epsilon system lasted 18 hours, during which Elena found herself unable to sleep despite her body's exhaustion. She spent the time reviewing battle plans, running combat simulations, and trying to anticipate every possible variation in Devourer response patterns. "Captain," called Lieutenant Torres from the navigation station as they prepared to drop back into normal space. "We're approaching the target system. All vessels report ready for combat operations." Elena settled into her command chair, feeling the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that preceded action. Around her, the bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, their faces reflecting the tension that permeated the entire ship. "Communications, open a channel to all vessels," Elena ordered. "Channel open, Captain." Elena took a deep breath before speaking. "This is Captain Vasquez to all ships. We are about to engage an enemy that has never faced human tactical doctrine in action. Remember that our greatest advantages are speed, flexibility, and the element of surprise. Trust your instincts, trust your training, and trust each other. Defiance out." She closed the channel and turned to her tactical officer. "Commander Chen, are our sensor arrays configured for maximum detection range?" Sarah nodded from her position at the tactical station. "All sensors are operating at peak efficiency. We should detect any Devourer vessels as soon as we enter the system." "Good. Drop us out of hyperspace." The Defiance shuddered slightly as it transitioned back to normal space, and immediately the main screen filled with the image of Proxima Epsilon, a red dwarf star surrounded by a handful of rocky planets. Long-range sensors quickly identified their target, a Devourer installation on the system's outermost planet, a frozen ball of ice and rock that the machines had chosen as a forward observation post. "Contact," announced Ensign Park from the sensor station. "Devourer installation confirmed on Planet 7. I'm also detecting 3 mobile units in orbit around the installation." Elena studied the tactical display as it updated with real-time information. "Analysis, Commander Chen?" Sarah manipulated the display to highlight the enemy ships. "Devourer configuration. 2 escort vessels and 1 heavy cruiser. The escorts are fast attack craft, designed for interception and harassment. The cruiser carries their main defensive systems and communication arrays." "Perfect," Elena murmured. "Exactly what we hoped for. Communications. Signal the fleet to move to Phase 1 positions." Throughout the task force, ships began moving into carefully planned formations. The Chitauri vessel Swarm Striker took point with its escort of human destroyers, while the heavier cruisers positioned themselves for rapid hyperspace jumps back into the system. The nebuloid ship Whisper of Void seemed to simply disappear as its gaseous crew utilized their natural camouflage abilities. "All vessels report ready," Torres announced. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment when theory would meet reality. "Helm, take us in. Make it look like a standard patrol route that accidentally brought us too close to their perimeter." The Defiance moved deeper into the system, its course seemingly random but actually calculated to trigger Devourer response protocols while positioning the ship for rapid evasive action. Elena watched the tactical display intently, waiting for the enemy to react. "Captain," Park called out, "I'm detecting movement from the Devourer ships. The escorts are breaking orbit and moving to intercept." "Right on schedule," Elena said with satisfaction. "They're following their standard protocol. Send fast ships to identify and harass the intruder while keeping their heavy units in defensive position." Sarah frowned as she studied the sensor readings. "Elena, something doesn't feel right about this. They're responding exactly as you predicted, but their formation seems too perfect. Like they're following a textbook." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Sarah was right. The Devourer response was almost mechanically precise, lacking the adaptive variations they had shown in previous engagements. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Elena asked quietly. "That this might be a trap?" The thought had occurred to me. Elena considered their options rapidly. They could abort the mission and retreat, but that would mean abandoning their only chance to test human tactical theories under real combat conditions. Or they could proceed with the assumption that the enemy was trying to lure them into overconfidence. "Change of plans," Elena decided. "Signal the fleet to implement Contingency Alpha." Contingency Alpha was one of several backup plans they had developed, designed to account for the possibility that the Devourers had anticipated their approach. Instead of the carefully orchestrated strike they had originally planned, Elena was shifting to pure improvisation, the one thing no enemy could prepare for because even she didn't know exactly what she was going to do. "Captain Vasquez to all vessels," she announced over the tactical network. "Original plan is scrubbed. We are now operating under adaptive protocols. Follow my lead and trust your instincts." She turned to her helm officer. "Take us directly toward the lead escort vessel, full acceleration." "Ma'am?" The helmsman looked confused. "That will put us in their optimal firing range." "Exactly. They expect us to maintain distance and try to escape. Instead, we're going to close with them and force a point-blank engagement." As the Defiance accelerated toward the approaching Devourer ships, Elena opened a private channel to the other human vessels in the task force. "Marcus, Singh, Peterson, remember our academy training in close-quarters combat. These machines have adapted to our standard doctrines, but they've never seen human desperation tactics." Captain Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "Understood, Elena. Wellington is ready to follow your lead." The two forces closed rapidly, with the Devourer escorts maintaining perfect formation while accelerating to intercept. Elena watched the distance counter tick down, waiting for the optimal moment. 500 kilometers and closing, Park reported. "They're charging weapons. 300 kilometers. 200 kilometers. Now!" Elena shouted. "Emergency stop. All vessels, emergency stop and attack pattern Delta." The Defiance's engines reverse thrust with bone-jarring suddenness, bringing the ship to a near-instantaneous halt just as the Devourer escort swept past at high speed. The sudden deceleration caught the enemy ships completely off guard. Their targeting systems had been calculating for intercept courses, not for a target that would suddenly stop moving. Around Elena's flagship, the other human vessels executed the same maneuver with split-second precision. Then, as the confused Devourer ships tried to reverse course, the human task force opened fire with everything they had. "Direct hits on both escorts," Sarah reported with excitement in her voice. "Their shields are down, and I'm reading significant damage to their propulsion systems." But Elena was already thinking ahead. Don't celebrate yet. The hard part is just beginning. Where's their heavy cruiser? "Still in orbit around the installation," Park replied. "But it's beginning to move this way." Elena studied the tactical display and made another snap decision. "All ships, form up on the Defiance. We're going to charge their cruiser." This time, several of her officers looked openly shocked. "Captain," Sarah said carefully, "that ship outguns our entire task force. A direct assault is exactly what they're not expecting, Elena finished. They've seen coalition forces retreat when facing superior firepower. They've adapted their tactics to account for cautious approaches and standoff engagements, but they've never seen anyone stupid enough to charge a heavy cruiser with a handful of smaller ships. As the human vessels formed up for their attack run, Elena opened a channel to the non-human ships in her task force. Commander Vex, I need your swarm tactics. Not the standard Chitauri approach, something improvised and chaotic. Resonance Captain Thrill, can your vessel handle rapid course changes while maintaining fire control? The responses came back quickly and positively. Elena found herself grinning as she realized that her diverse crew of volunteers was embracing the concept of tactical improvisation with enthusiasm that matched her own. Avatar Commander Drift Between Stars, she continued, I need you to do something that will confuse their sensors. I don't care what it is, as long as it's something they've never seen before. The electromagnetic response from the Nebuloid commander was so complex that Elena's translator simply rendered it as acknowledged with extreme satisfaction. The human task force accelerated toward the Devourer cruiser with the Chitauri vessel providing flanking support and the Resonari ship maintaining carefully calculated formation that would allow maximum fire concentration. Behind them, the two damaged escort vessels struggled to repair their systems while trying to pursue. They're launching fighters, Park reported as they closed with the enemy cruiser. Elena watched as a dozen small craft emerged from the Devourer ship's launch bays. Perfect. Swarm Striker, this is your moment. Show them what real swarm tactics look like. Commander Vex's vessel suddenly broke formation and began executing a series of seemingly random maneuvers that brought it into contact with the enemy fighters. But Elena could see the method in the apparent madness. The Chitauri ship was using its superior maneuverability to force the fighters into a chaotic close-range engagement where their numerical advantage became a liability as they interfered with each other's targeting. At the same time, Whisper of Void did something that Elena had never seen before. The nebuloid ship suddenly expanded, its gaseous form spreading across several cubic kilometers of space while somehow maintaining cohesion. The Devourer cruiser's sensors were clearly having trouble tracking a target that had no fixed boundaries. All human vessels, concentrate fire on their forward weapons arrays, Elena ordered. We need to reduce their offensive capability before they can bring their main guns to bear. The combined firepower of 18 human ships struck the Devourer cruiser's forward sections with devastating effect. The enemy vessel staggered under the assault, its shields flaring and failing under the concentrated barrage. But Elena knew they had only moments before the cruiser's superior firepower would turn the tide of battle. Harmonic Convergence, I need you to do something with their targeting systems. Disrupt their fire control with harmonic interference. The crystalline Resonari vessel began generating complex harmonic patterns that resonated through local space. Elena could see the effect immediately as the Devourer cruiser's weapons began firing erratically, their targeting systems confused by the sonic interference. Now, Elena shouted, all vessels, emergency acceleration! Get us past their firing arc before they can compensate. The human task force shot forward, using their superior acceleration to close the final distance to the enemy cruiser before it could bring its main weapons to bear effectively. Elena watched the range counter drop rapidly as they approached point-blank range. Ramming speed, she ordered, hoping her crews would understand what she meant. They did. The human ships closed to almost touching distance with the Devourer cruiser, so close that the enemy's heavy weapons couldn't depress enough to target them effectively. At this range, the human vessel's smaller guns were devastating against the cruiser's relatively unarmored sections. Heavy damage to the enemy vessel, Sarah reported. Their main reactor is showing instability. Elena felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they still had to deal with the installation on the planet below and the two damaged escorts that were now closing in from behind. Signal Lieutenant Colonel Zix, she ordered. Tell him it's time for the Vorthek contribution to human tactical doctrine. Elena had deliberately saved her most unconventional asset for the critical moment. Zix commanded a special operations unit equipped with experimental boarding pods, weapons that were considered too risky by conventional military standards but perfect for the kind of desperate improvisation that Elena was employing. "Zix confirms launch," Torres reported. "Boarding pods are away." Elena watched as 6 small craft detached from the task force and accelerated toward the damaged Devourer cruiser. These weren't normal boarding craft. They were essentially guided missiles with just enough life support to keep their crews alive during the brief journey to the target. The pods struck the enemy cruiser's hull and immediately began cutting through the armor plating. Within minutes, Vorthak special forces were fighting their way through the ship's interior, targeting critical systems that couldn't be effectively damaged by external fire. "Enemy cruiser is losing power," Park announced. "I'm reading massive system failures throughout their ship." But Elena was already looking ahead to the next phase of the engagement. "Commander Chen, what's the status of those escort vessels?" Sarah checked her displays. "They've completed basic repairs and are closing fast. Estimated time to engagement range, 4 minutes. Elena made another snap decision. All ships except Defiance, Wellington, and Mumbai. Break off and engage the installation on the planet. The 3 of us will handle the escorts." It was a risky division of forces, but Elena was counting on the psychological impact of her task force's unconventional tactics to give them an advantage over enemy ships that were designed to respond to predictable threats. As the majority of her fleet broke away to attack the planetary installation, Elena found herself commanding just 3 ships against 2 damaged but still dangerous Devourer escorts. "Marcus, Singh," she called over the comm. "Remember our Academy instructor who said 3 human ships could never defeat 2 alien vessels in a stand-up fight?" Captain Rodriguez's voice came back with obvious amusement. "I remember you arguing that it depended on who was defining the rules of engagement." "Exactly. And right now we're making up the rules as we go." The 2 escort vessels approached in perfect formation, their weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto the human ships. Elena waited until they were committed to their attack run before giving her next order. "All ships, implement the Rodriguez maneuver." It was named after Marcus because he had been the first to successfully execute it during their final Academy exercises. The 3 human ships suddenly broke formation and began flying in seemingly random patterns while maintaining a roughly triangular arrangement. To outside observers, it looked like panic. To Elena and her crews, it was a carefully choreographed dance designed to exploit human pilots' superior reaction times and intuitive spatial reasoning. The Devourer escorts found themselves trying to target ships that seemed to be flying like drunken pilots, except that every apparently random movement brought the human vessels into optimal firing positions while simultaneously avoiding enemy weapons. "It's working," Sarah reported with excitement. "Their targeting systems can't get locks on us, but we're landing hits with every pass." Elena felt a fierce satisfaction as she watched her improvised tactics confuse and frustrate an enemy that had adapted to counter every standard coalition approach. This was what human military doctrine could accomplish when freed from the constraints of conventional thinking. But the real test was still ahead. As her remaining ships engaged the escorts, she could see explosions beginning to bloom around the Devourer installation on the planet below. Her other commanders were implementing their own versions of human tactical flexibility, and from the early reports coming in, they were having remarkable success. The question was whether they could maintain this level of performance when the Devourers had time to analyze and adapt to their new approach. Elena was betting everything on the hope that human tactical thinking was too chaotic and intuitive for machine intelligence to easily counter. As the battle continued to unfold, she began to believe that her bet might actually pay off. The battle for the Proxima Epsilon installation raged for 6 hours, and by the time the last Devourer structure was reduced to scrap metal, Elena's task force had achieved something unprecedented in coalition military history, a complete tactical victory against the machines with minimal casualties. "Final damage report," Elena called as her ships regrouped in orbit around the conquered planet. 2 ships with moderate damage, 1 with light damage, and 18 wounded across the entire task force, Sarah reported. "No fatalities." Elena stared at the tactical display in amazement. Traditional coalition engagements with the Devourers typically resulted in casualty rates of 30% or higher, even in victory. Her task force had achieved complete success while losing less than 5% of their combat effectiveness. "Captain," called Commander Vex over the communication system, "the hive mind requests clarification of tactical principles demonstrated during this engagement." Elena opened a channel to all vessels. "What do you want to know, Commander?" "Your tactical decisions appeared to violate standard military doctrine at multiple points, yet they produced optimal results. How does human military thinking achieve such contradictions?" Elena considered the question carefully. It went to the heart of what made human tactical doctrine unique among coalition species. "The answer is that we don't think of them as contradictions," she finally replied. "Other species approach warfare as a problem to be solved through optimal application of known principles. Humans approach warfare as a creative exercise that requires constant innovation." She paused, trying to find words that would translate properly across species barriers. "Your hive mind calculates the most efficient approach to achieve victory. Our individual minds look for approaches that the enemy won't expect, even if they're not the most efficient." Resonance Captain Thrill's harmonic response indicated deep analysis. Efficiency versus unpredictability. Fascinating. But how do you maintain unit coordination when individual commanders make independent tactical decisions? "We don't maintain perfect coordination," Elena admitted. "That's part of what makes us effective. When individual commanders adapt their tactics to local conditions without waiting for orders from higher command, the enemy can't predict our overall response patterns." Avatar Commander Drift Between Stars manifested patterns indicating approval. "Chaos as a weapon. Your species weaponizes its own inconsistency." Elena was about to respond when Lieutenant Torres interrupted. "Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Coalition Command." Elena felt a chill run through her. News of their victory had obviously reached the higher levels of military command, but she wasn't sure what kind of response to expect. "Put it through," she ordered. The main screen flickered and resolved into the imposing figure of Supreme War Commander Kazath. Elena had expected anger or suspicion, but his expression was unreadable. "Captain Vasquez," he began without preamble, "your preliminary report claims complete destruction of the Devourer installation with minimal friendly casualties. Confirm these results." "Confirmed, Supreme War Commander. The installation has been completely eliminated, along with 3 mobile defense units and approximately 24 support craft. Our casualties are 18 wounded. No fatalities." Kazath's burning eyes studied her for a long moment. "These results seem improbable. If our installations are heavily fortified and defended by adaptive AI systems, how did your force achieve such decisive victory?" Elena took a deep breath before answering. "We used tactics that the Devourers had never encountered before, Supreme War Commander. Human tactical doctrine proved effective against their adaptive countermeasures." "Elaborate." Elena summarized the key elements of their assault: the improvised maneuvers, the close-range engagements, the use of apparently chaotic formations that confused enemy targeting systems. As she spoke, she could see Kazath's expression slowly changing. "You deliberately abandoned established tactical principles," he said when she finished. "You sacrificed formation integrity, exposed your vessels to unnecessary risk, and divided your forces against a superior enemy." Elena felt her heart sink. It sounded like he was preparing to censure her for reckless endangerment of coalition resources. "Yes, Supreme War Commander," she replied formally. "I take full responsibility for those decisions." To her surprise, Kazath's fierce expression shifted slightly. "Captain Vasquez, you have achieved something that our best strategic minds considered impossible. The Council of War is impressed." Elena blinked in confusion. "Sir, intelligence analysis of your engagement indicates that the Devourers were completely unable to adapt to your tactical approach. Their response patterns became increasingly erratic as the battle progressed. This represents the first time we have observed adaptive failure in their combat algorithms." Kazith leaned forward slightly. The Council wishes to know if your methods can be replicated on a larger scale. Elena felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. I believe so, Supreme War Commander, but it would require significant changes to standard coalition military doctrine. Explain. Human tactical thinking works best when individual commanders have the authority to make rapid decisions without approval from higher command. We need smaller, more independent units that can adapt to local conditions in real time. She paused, knowing her next words might be seen as criticism of established coalition military hierarchy. Traditional command structures are too rigid for the kind of tactical flexibility that proved effective against the Devourers. Kazath was silent for nearly a minute, his predator's gaze never leaving Elena's face. Finally, he spoke. Captain Vasquez, you are hereby promoted to Commodore and given authority to expand Operation Nightfall. You will have access to whatever resources you require to develop human tactical doctrine for larger-scale implementation. Elena felt dizzy with the implications of what he was saying. Supreme War Commander, are you authorizing me to restructure coalition military operations? I am authorizing you to save the coalition from extinction, Kazath replied bluntly. The Devourers have been systematically defeating our forces because they can predict and counter our tactical approaches. You have demonstrated a methodology that renders their predictive capabilities useless. The screen flickered as additional data began transmitting to Elena's ship. You will find updated intelligence on Devourer force dispositions throughout the Outer Rim. Your next objective is to eliminate their primary manufacturing complex in the Kepler Nexus system. Elena studied the incoming data with growing concern. The Kepler Nexus installation was massive, a factory complex spanning 3 planets and protected by a fleet of over 50 Devourer vessels. Supreme War Commander, she said carefully, this target is significantly larger than anything we've attempted before. I would need a much larger force to have any chance of success. You will have one, Kazith replied. Every volunteer unit in coalition space has requested assignment to your command. Additionally, several species councils have authorized the formation of new experimental units specifically for Operation Nightfall. Elena stared at him in amazement. How many ships are we talking about? 317 vessels from 42 different species, Kazith said with what might have been satisfaction. The largest multinational task force in coalition history. The implications were staggering. Elena would be commanding not just a battle group, but an entire fleet. More importantly, she would be responsible for proving that human tactical doctrine could work on a strategic level. There is one additional consideration, Kazath continued. Intelligence suggests that the Devourers are beginning to modify their tactical algorithms in response to your previous engagement. They are attempting to develop countermeasures for what they classify as chaotic human warfare patterns. Elena felt a chill. If the Devourers could adapt to human tactical thinking, her advantage would disappear quickly. How long do we have before they complete their analysis? She asked. Unknown, but each engagement provides them with additional data to work with. Time is not on our side. After the transmission ended, Elena found herself alone on the bridge, staring at the tactical data for the Kepler Nexus system. The target was daunting enough, but the real pressure came from knowing that the future of human participation in coalition military affairs depended on her success. Sarah approached her command chair. Elena, you realize what just happened, don't you? You've been given command of the largest military force humanity has ever been associated with. Elena nodded numbly. And if I fail, it will be the last military command any human receives for the next century. So don't fail. Elena managed a weak smile. Thanks for the helpful advice. Over the next 48 hours, Elena watched in amazement as ships from across coalition space converged on her position. The diversity was overwhelming. Sleek Elysian fast cruisers, massive Taurian battleships, exotic quantum collective vessels that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each species brought their own tactical traditions and combat doctrines, creating a command challenge that Elena had never imagined facing. How could she coordinate hundreds of ships with fundamentally different approaches to warfare, while maintaining the flexibility that made human tactics effective. The answer, she realized, was not to try. All ship commanders, she announced during her first fleet-wide briefing, I want you to forget everything you know about coalition military doctrine. For the duration of Operation Nightfall, we are not going to fight like Vorthax or Chitauri or Resonari or any other established pattern. The response from the assembled commanders was a mixture of confusion and intrigue. Instead, Elena continued, I want each of you to think about how your species approached warfare before joining the coalition. What were your historical military traditions? What tactics did you use when you were fighting for survival instead of following standardized procedures? The questions sparked intense discussions throughout the fleet as commanders began reconnecting with their species' martial heritage. Elena discovered that the coalition's emphasis on standardized tactics had suppressed a rich diversity of military thinking. The Quantum Collective, for example, had originally fought using tactics based on probability manipulation, appearing to be in multiple locations simultaneously to confuse enemies. The Taurians had been masters of what they called gravitational warfare, using their massive ships to create artificial gravity wells that disrupted enemy formations. As Elena studied the tactical possibilities offered by her diverse fleet, she began to see how human improvisational thinking could serve as the connecting element that bound these different approaches together. We're not going to create a new standard doctrine, she explained to her senior staff. We're going to create a constantly changing doctrine. Every engagement will use different tactical combinations, different species taking the lead, different approaches to the same problems. Commander Vex's compound eyes focused on her intently. Clarification. You propose to make unpredictability itself our primary tactical principle? Exactly.